Well, when I think about influence, there's a number of people that come to mind, but the number one person that I think about having influence in my life is my wife, Britton. You know, she's been influencing my life since the moment we met. I remember early on when we were dating, and I decided to impress her. And so we went out for dinner to the Keg. I was going to be romantic and, show her that I was, this great guy all at the same time. And so we sat down in the Keg and we ordered appetizers as soon as we sat down. And then we began to pour over the menu. And I said to Britton, order whatever you'd like. The cost is no object. I wanted to impress her, remember? And we ordered our main, and then we had our great discussion. We're laughing and just having a great time together. I mean, this was going spectacular. And then it happened. The server came with a plate of food and put it down in front of me. It was their world-famous steak along with their twice-baked potato and this green things. A few of these green things were on the plate. You might know them as broccoli. I looked at them and I knew I was in trouble. You see, I really, at least at that point in my life, I did not like vegetables. I am the youngest kid, grew up most of my life being the youngest at that point, and what that meant is that when I was sat down to eat, if there was something on the table that I didn't like, my mom made me something else. My brother and sister thought I was spoiled. I just thought that's the way life was, right? And so this green thing comes, and I've never really eaten green vegetables at this point in my life. In fact, the only vegetables that I would really eat at that point in my life were potatoes and corn. Those were the two staples in my life for vegetables. But here was this plate, and on it was green broccoli. And I wanted to impress this beautiful young lady sitting across from me. I started eating, and I ate everything that I could around the plate until only the broccoli was left, and then I was stuck. There was no dog underneath the table to feed it to. Britton had not gone to the powder room, so I couldn't dump it somewhere. I was going to be forced to eat it. And I did. That's when I realized something. One, I realized how much I loved this lady. And two, I realized I really like broccoli. And you know what? Britton has been a positive influence like that throughout all of the 30 years that we have been together. She's helped me to like broccoli. I now like carrots. I even like Brussels sprouts. And she doesn't even really like Brussels sprouts. This is the influence that someone can have in your life. Britton has influenced me so that I like vegetables. Who has influenced your life? Who has impacted you in such a way? You know, influence is this thing of having an effect on the behaviors and the attitudes in our life. It's something that each of us have. We all have influence, and it's something that each of us experience. We are all influenced. And you know, we're in this series called Praxis. And this series, Praxis, is all about the thoughts and the beliefs and the actions that help us discover the life that Jesus envisions. It's about living the life that Jesus wants us to live. And one of the things about our life is that Jesus wants us to have influence. You see, in life, you are either being influenced or you are an influence. There is no in between. The problem is that sometimes we are influenced more than we are an influence, especially when it comes to being a follower of Jesus Christ. That sometimes the pressures around us influence us more than we influence the world that we are in or the people that we are around. And here's what I want you to know. As we look today at this church that we're looking at, because in this series we've been looking at 7 churches that Jesus sent 7 messages to. And today we're talking about a church called Pergamum. And there's an incredible truth that Jesus has for us today, something he wants us to do. You see, Jesus' vision is that you would be an influencer. Let me explain why I say that. If you have your Bibles, turn with me to Revelation chapter 2, verses 12 to 17, and we're going to look at this church in the city of Pergamum. The city of Pergamum was an influential city. It was the capital in the region, a lot like we are. And there were government buildings there. There was a Roman fortress built there. There was a number of temples there, including 2 key temples to pagan gods. And it was an influential city in its region. And these temples and the fortress and the government building were built up on a hill. And they overshadowed the rest of the city. You could see them wherever you are. They exerted their influence everywhere they were. And one of the things that we find out about the church in Pergamum is that they were viewed as kind of weird. Actually, Christians at that time were always viewed as weird. You see, the world was polytheistic, which meant that they worshiped many gods. In fact, they would worship a god depending on what they needed at that time. And so they had all these temples in the city because you have very different needs. One of the temples in the city was dedicated to healing. And so if you were sick, you would go to this temple and you would offer sacrifice to this god and you would ask for healing. If you needed good crops or needed rain, you would go to another temple and you would do that. That's what a polytheistic world was like. You worshiped the god that you needed at that moment. But Christians were weird. You see, Christians, they believed that there was one God eternally existing in three people. This one in three God, this was something new. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and yet they are only one. And not only that, but they believed that you could only worship this one true God. And so they were looked upon by society as being people that were weird, that were people that were looked upon as being intolerant of other faiths and other religions. And they were under constant pressure to conform to what was going on around them. They were under pressure to conform from their monotheism to a polytheism every time they went around. And Jesus says this to the church. He says this, these are the words of him who has the sharp, double-edged sword. Kind of a weird way to start out, isn't it? He says, these are the words of him who has the sharp, double-edged sword. And I just happen to have a double-edged sword here that someone lent to me. And the sword was actually the symbol of Pergamum. The city of Pergamum, which was a Roman city, had been given the right to put the sword into their city logo, into their emblem. Rome had given them, amongst all the other cities in their region, the right to use the sword. The sword was a symbol of war, but the sword was also a symbol of judgment. It was a symbol of power. And Jesus says, you know what? Rome may have given Pergamum the right to carry a sword or to have a sword as their emblem, but I am the one who carries the double-edged sword. You see, Jesus holds all the power. Jesus holds all the authority. Rome may think that they can give authority. Rome may think that they have power, but I actually have it. Jesus says, I'm the one who holds the double-edged sword. And he goes on and he says this, I know where you live, where Satan has his throne, yet you remain true to my name. You did not renounce your faith in me, not even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness, who was put to death in your city where Satan lives. Twice he says where Satan lives in here. He says that this is a place where Satan has his throne. Satan is the enemy of our soul. He seeks to devour us. He seeks to destroy us. And Jesus identifies the city of Pergamum as a place where Satan has his day, where he rules over everything, and yet Jesus says, I'm coming with my sword, and I'm going to fight for you, Pergamum. He says to the church, you remain true to my name. These were faithful people. You stayed true to my name even in the days of Antipas, who gave his life in order to remain faithful to me. And you see, Antipas, we don't know much about him, but scholars believe that he was the first martyr in the city of Pergamum, that he actually would not let go of his faith, that he was being an influence in the society around him, and he did not change his faith or conform in any way to the pressures around him, that he was standing up for the one true God, that he was telling others to come and worship the one true God, and because of this, he was executed. This is what faithfulness looks like the life of Antipas, who was loyal even to the point where he was executed. And then it goes on, and it says this. It says, nevertheless, I have a few things against you. There are some who hold to the teachings of Balaam, who taught Balak to entice the Israelites to sin so that they ate food sacrificed to idols. You know, it's not that there was a person named Balaam in the church. It's that Jesus is pointing back to something that happened a long time ago, and he's contrasting this with the person of Antipas. You see, Antipas had been someone who had influence in the city of Pergamum. See, you don't get put to death if you're not exerting influence. You only get put to death if you are influencing people to follow Jesus. And he was having an influence, and people were feeling threatened. And so they did what they could, and they stopped him from being an influence. You see, Jesus' vision is that you would be an influence, not that you would be influenced. And you see, Antipas was an influence within his city. But Balaam, or the people that followed the teachings of Balaam, as Jesus talks about, these were people that were actually conforming to the world around them. Instead of being an influence like Antipas was, they were being influenced by the world around them. It says in Revelation that they would go to ceremonies where food was sacrificed to idols, and then they would eat that food afterwards. And you see in the other religions that were in Pergamum, this was a common thing. All of the trade guilds would have regular celebrations worshiping the god that was the deity of that trade guild. If you wanted to belong to that trade guild, you would have to be a part of that celebration. And so the people who were following Balaam's teaching were going and they were offering food to an idol, to a statue who could do nothing with it. And they would take the food after it had been offered to the idol, and then they would eat it. That's what food sacrificed to idols was. And they would partake in other activities as well. And they were conforming. They were trying to worship Jesus, but also be a part of society. They were conforming their faith in Jesus to what it looked like in the rest of the world. Instead of being an influence like Antipas, they were being influenced. And this is exactly what this man Balaam had done in the Old Testament. The reference to Balaam goes back to Numbers 22, where we read the story of a man named Balaam who actually knew God. He's called a prophet. And he actually heard from God. And he was hired by the Moabites to come and to curse the Israelites, the people of God. So here you have this man who knows God, who has heard God's voice, and yet he's hired to come and curse God's people. And instead of saying no, he's more interested in the money, in the dough, than in saying no. And so he goes up on top of a hill to curse all of the Israelites who are down camped at the bottom of the hill, and he starts to speak, but God won't let him curse the Israelites, and only a blessing comes out of his mouth. And he tries to do this 3 times. You probably know this story if you went to church as a kid, because there's this story about Balaam who's riding on a donkey, and suddenly his donkey starts talking to him. God starts speaking to him through his donkey. This is that guy. And you know, we learn from that story in Sunday school, or at least I did in Sunday school, that Balaam actually stopped what he was doing, that God spoke through a donkey, and so Balaam stopped. But here's the end of the story that we don't often talk about in kids' church. It's that Balaam actually didn't stop. He stopped trying to curse the people of God, but he didn't stop working against the people of God. And he and the people of Moabite, they came up with another plan. He sent some of the Moabites into the Israelite camp to tempt them to disobey God, to break their covenant with God. And you see, what we learn from the teachings of Balaam is that there is overt influence that is trying to be exerted on our faith, trying to conform us or to change the way that we think. And we can see that very clearly and deal with it. But then there is the subtle influence that happens in life that we don't even notice as it slips into the camp of our life and tempts us away from God. And this is what's happening in the church. You see, the church in Pergamum was deeply divided. You had the faithful people like Antipas who were following God, and then you had the people who were following the teachings of the Balaamites. People who had been subtly influenced by society into changing what they believe about Jesus. There's this contrast here between Antipas and Balaam. And here's what you need to know, is that you are meant to be a transforming influence into the world. The problem is that we are constantly being influenced. We are constantly put under pressure to conform, to change. We are constantly being influenced. And we need to stand firm on the rock of Jesus Christ so that we can be the transforming influence in the world. You see, the church was meant to be a transforming influence in our world. But the problem is, like in Pergamum, the church has been influenced by society, by culture, instead of influencing society and culture. We've been influenced by things like industrialism, consumerism, the idea that I should get what I want, and if I don't get it, I should go somewhere else and find it where I want to. We've been influenced by racism. Any church that does not preach that all are equal and loved by God has been influenced by racism. We've been influenced by chauvinism. We've been influenced by feminism. We've been influenced by many different isms, by the idea that prosperity should follow the gospel. We have been influenced by so many things as the church that we have trouble today being an influence in society and in culture because we look so much like the culture and society. But Jesus invites you to be an influence in the world, not to be influenced by the world. When I look at the life of Jesus as I see in the Gospels, you know what I realize? I realize that Jesus would not make a good Canadian. I say this because, as Canadians, one of the values that we have, one of the values that we see espoused by our leaders is this idea of tolerance, which really what we mean is accepting everybody, accepting that there is no truth, that there is no absolute truth, that accepting that there are many ways to God, accepting whatever it is, that we can live however we want and not pay the consequence. But that's not the life that we see Jesus live. You see, Jesus actually drew lines in the sand. He said, this is what's in and this is what's out. He was markedly intolerant. He called sin, sin. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. There is no other way to the Father except through me. That all other religions are dead ends. The only one that goes to him is through Jesus. This is the life that Jesus lived. And in Canada today, I don't think he would fit in very well. But at the same time that Jesus was markedly intolerant, he was markedly full of grace and truth and love and mercy and compassion. So the very people that he said, here's the line and here's what's in and here's what's out, he loved incredibly. I think the greatest example of that is Judas Iscariot. Do you know who Judas was? He was one of the disciples of Jesus, yet he's the one that betrays Jesus on the night that he was crucified. He's the one that sells Jesus out. And yet Jesus, for 3 years, loves this man. He loves this man, but he never stops telling Judas what's right and wrong. But he loves this man with an unconditional love. This is the life of Jesus. And he was an influence. When we think about Jesus, what do we think about? We are reminded of the love of Jesus, right? This love that transformed the world, really. You see, Jesus is the influencer that we are meant to follow. We throw around this word influencer quite a bit these days, right? There's all sorts of influencers in the world on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. And, these influencers, they use their audience, as it were, to get something that they want them to do, right? So they're trying to influence them to buy something. They're trying to influence them to do something. They're in it for themselves, really. But Jesus, the first influencer, was not in it for himself. In fact, he said, if you want to have influence, you lay down your life for your friends. And that's exactly what he did. To influence the world, he gave up his life. And Antipas in Pergamum did the same thing. You see, the church is meant to be a transforming influence in the world. You are meant to be a transforming influence in the world. But in order to do that, you have to stop letting the world influence you. Stop letting the world influence what you do, how you think, who you are. And instead, let Jesus Christ be the sole defining influence in your life. We need to take every idea, every thought that we have, every action that we do captive, and we need to bring it to Jesus Christ and let him decide what is right or wrong. He goes on and he says that, repent therefore, otherwise I will soon come to you and will fight against you with the sword of my mouth. With the sword of my mouth. This goes back to the vision that John had in Revelation chapter 1, where he sees Jesus standing there in a white robe, and he says, and out of his mouth came a sharp, double-edged sword. The idea is not that Jesus looks weird. The idea is that his words, what he speaks, is a sharp, double-edged sword. A sharp, double-edged sword can cut anything in half. It divides truth from lies. And Jesus says, I'm coming. And I'm going to wage war on heresy. I'm going to wage war on lies. I'm going to wage war on everything that takes you away from me. And friends, as we go through life, we need to come to Jesus, who has a sharp, double-edged sword, who can divide truth from lies, fact from fiction. And we need to bring to him these things that we aren't sure about. When we feel influence coming on us from outside of us, we need to come to Jesus and say, Jesus, show me the truth, because you are the one who wields the truth. That is what it means to carry a sharp double-edged sword. And Jesus needs to be the influence in our life if we are to be influencers in this world. Jesus makes a promise at the end of this, that if we will come to him and let him be the influence in our life, and if we will be influencers, he makes two promises. He says, first, I will give to the one who is victorious. That means to the one who stands up like Antipas did. He's the one who's victorious in this passage. And anyone who lives like Antipas did, who seeks to influence their culture, influence their society, their family, their friends, whatever's around them, they will be considered victorious. And he says, anyone who has ears to hear, which is you and me, we have ears, don't we? We have ears. So this message is just not for Pergamum, it's for all of us. And he says, if you and I will be victorious, that he will give some of his hidden manna. What does that mean? Well, in the Old Testament, in Exodus, we see that the children of Israel go out into the wilderness when they have no food. And God provides manna from heaven, food. And when the Ark of the Covenant, which was meant to be a representative of God's presence, kind of his footstool, as it were, when that is built, they take some of this manna and they hide it away inside the Ark of the Covenant, the symbol of God's presence amongst his people. And Jesus says to the one who is victorious, I will give some of my hidden manna. I will give them everything that they need. I will give them my presence. But then he says something else. He says, I will give to the one who is victorious a white rock. A white rock. What do we need with a white rock, right? Well, in Pergamum, in that day, when you were put on trial, like Antipas would have been, they would have had two rocks, a black rock and a white rock. And they would have listened to the court case. And when they came back, they would display one of the rocks. If the black rock was shown, then you were guilty and you were executed, like Antipas was. If the white rock was shown, then you were innocent and free to go. And Jesus says to the one who is victorious, I will give them a white rock. It doesn't matter what Pergamum says. It doesn't matter what society says. It doesn't matter what anyone around you says. If you will hold steady and resist the subtle influence of society, of culture, of friends, of family, that even though they may judge you, even though they may consider you wrong, that I will give you a white rock, and I will show that you are right and innocent and true and faithful. Which rock would you rather have? The white one that comes if we are influencers and let Jesus influence us, or the black one that allows us to conform, to be like everybody else, to give up the strong convictions? You know, the Christian life is marked by strong convictions. Strong convictions that are tempered with love. So how do we be influencers today? You know, well, first we need to come to Jesus and we need to realize that he is the influence in our life, that he shapes who we are, how we think, and what we do. That's the start of it. I said this already. Take captive every thought, every action, every word, and let Jesus define what is right and wrong. You know, we've come to this place in life for the last 300 years, really, where we have thought that human reason is above God's reason. You know, René Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. And I think today we believe this, I think, therefore I am God. And we rule out anything that God has to say. And we need to come back to actually saying, you know what, God's word and Jesus are the truth in the world. And they are the standard by which we measure everything by. They are the sharp, double-edged sword that divides truth from lies. That's the start. But then how do we be influencers with each other? Well, you know, when I look at Jesus, there is this dynamic that goes on between him. Even in this letter in Pergamum, and later on or with your group this week, take a look at this letter and see if this dynamic exists in this letter as I'm talking about. But it's this dynamic between love and truth. When I look at Jesus' life, he brings an unprecedented amount of love into every relationship that he has, into every conversation that he has. But he also brings an unprecedented level of truth. And you know, in life, sometimes we don't bring love and truth together. We either think that you have to be loving or you have to be truthful. But actually, Jesus models a life for us of an influencer, which is defined by a dynamic between love and truth. And when we bring love but don't bring any truth, we find that we will conform in the world, that we will do whatever someone asks us to do because we are bringing love into every situation, but we aren't bringing that truth. When we bring truth but no love, we are declared judgmental, and we find ourselves judging the world. When we bring neither of those, we're really uncaring. We're indifferent about what's going on in the world. But when we bring a high level of love and a high level of truth, this is when influence happens, and you become an influencer. Not only that, but this is when transformation happens. You see, as you bring love and truth, this dynamic between these two things, transformation happens in people's lives. And that's what it means to be an influencer. So in order to be an influencer this week, you need to bring your thoughts and your actions, the things that you're going to do, even your checkbook, even what you're going to do on vacation this summer, even what you're thinking, what the future looks like years out. Bring it to Jesus and let him influence that. And then as you encounter people this week, begin to bring love and truth into every relationship, into every conversation. You know, maybe this week, after you go through your day, sit down and evaluate. Did I bring love and truth, and did transformation happen? Or did I find myself conforming to what somebody else wanted me to do? Or did I find myself judging other people? And some of us are going to find that we have to work on the love. You know, that's what Ephesians, the church in Ephesus, had to do. Remember that? A couple weeks ago, we talked about Ephesus, and Jesus says to them, come back and love others the way that you did it first. Pergamum, on the other side, they're loving people, but they aren't holding on to truth. These two churches counterbalanced each other, and we see what happens when we don't bring both of them together. But friends, if you do, this is when transformation happens, and this is when you truly have influence in the world. And Jesus desires that you would be an influence in the world instead of being influenced by the world. You see, Jesus is inviting you today to be an influencer. What will you do? You know, can you imagine if all of us suddenly took up this challenge, took up this invitation to be influencers and brought love and truth into every relationship and every situation we are in? That if we made Jesus the one who decides what is true and not. Can you imagine what might happen? You know, the early church was full of people who were influencers, people like Antipas, people like Polycarp, who we talked about last week, people like John, who went to prison on Patmos because he was influencing society. And you know what? After 300 years of the church being full of influencers, do you know what happened? The Roman Empire that sought to exterminate Christianity itself was influenced as someone came close to the emperor, Caesar, and full of love and truth, helped them to discover Jesus. And the whole empire, the whole world was changed. Imagine what might happen if all of us that are watching this morning would take up this invitation of Jesus to be influencers in our day. Instead of letting the world influence and change our faith, that we held tight to what Jesus had to say, and with love and truth, we influenced everyone around us. Imagine what might happen. Let me pray for you.